I never thought this day would come. 7 long years away, and when I finally step foot on my family's land, the HOA rushes at me like I'm some kind of intruder. They shout at me to leave, they say this property isn't mine anymore. And when I refuse, they grab their phones and call 911. Within minutes, police cars fill the driveway, sirens echo by the lake, neighbors peeking through their windows, everyone waiting to see. Would I be dragged off my own land? Or would the truth finally come out? Stay with me, because what happened next, nobody in this neighborhood will ever forget. Hello friends, and welcome back to HOA Max Stories. My name is David. I live right here in the U.S., and I've spent my life watching how HOAs treat homeowners, sometimes fair, but most of the time, full of drama and power plays. This story is one of the most shocking I've ever faced, and I'm here to share every detail with you. Before we begin, if you're over 50, I'd love for you to join our little community here. Click that subscribe button, it's just like pulling up a chair with old friends to hear a story. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? I stood there, right on the edge of my family's land. The grass was tall, wild, like no one had cared for it in years. And yet, for me, it felt alive. 7 years away, and suddenly I was back where it all began. I took a deep breath. I could smell the lake. I could see the old wooden dock still standing, weathered, but strong. And in that moment, I felt home. But before I could even take 10 steps forward, they came. The HOA. It started with just one woman walking fast down the road. Then 2 more behind her. And then, like a small army, 5 or 6 board members standing in front of me, blocking my way. Their faces were hard, ice cold. And the first thing I heard was not hello, not welcome back. It was a loud, sharp voice. You don't belong here. I froze. For a second, I didn't even understand what she meant. This was my family's land, my father's land, and now mine. I smiled, trying to keep calm. I think you're mistaken, I said softly. This land has been in my family for decades. I've just been away. But my words didn't calm them, they made them angrier. Another man stepped forward, his finger pointing right at me. You abandoned this place. The HOA has taken care of this neighborhood. This property belongs to us now. The way he said it, the way the others nodded, it was like they truly believed it. Inside, I felt anger boiling, but I held it in. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to lose control. I stood tall. This land is mine. I have the deed. I have the papers. And you all know it. There was silence for a moment. But then they started again. Words flying like arrows, trespasser, troublemaker, disrespectful. I let them speak. Because deep down, I knew, truth was on my side. But then, things escalated. One woman grabbed her phone, shaking with rage. If you don't leave right now, she screamed, we're calling the cops. I crossed my arms. Go ahead, I said quietly. I'll be standing right here, waiting. And in that second, everything shifted. They weren't expecting me to stay calm. They weren't expecting me to challenge them. They wanted me to be scared, to run away, to give them power. But I stood still, like a tree rooted deep in the ground. I watched her dial. I heard her voice rise as she spoke to the 911 operator. Hello, yes, there's a trespasser on HOA property, send officers right away. HOA property. That's what she called it. Not my land. Not the land my father worked on. Not the place I played as a child. I felt my chest tighten. I looked around. Neighbors were coming out of their houses, peeking through curtains. Some stood on porches whispering, pointing. Within minutes, I heard it. Sirens. Faint at first, then louder, then echoing across the lake. Red and blue lights flickered through the trees. And one by one, police cars rolled into the driveway. The HOA stood proudly, like they had already won. One man clapped his hands together and said, almost with a smile, Finally, now you'll learn your lesson." I didn't move. My heart was pounding, but my face stayed calm. I could feel the eyes of every neighbor on me. I could feel the weight of the HOA's hatred pressing down. But I knew this was the moment. Doors slammed shut. 2 officers walked toward me, firm and serious. The HOA rushed at them, all talking at once. "He's trespassing. He's breaking into HOA land. He's dangerous, you need to remove him right now." The officers raised their hands, trying to silence the noise. One of them looked at me, his eyes scanning me up and down. "Sir, do you live here?" The question hit me like a punch. Not because I couldn't answer, but because of how easily it could all be twisted. In their eyes, I was already guilty. I took a slow breath. "Yes, officer," I said. "This is my land. I have the deed. My father passed it to me years ago. I've been away, but this property belongs to me." The HOA erupted again. "He's lying. That's our land. He abandoned it, we claimed it." I could see the officers' faces, caught between 2 sides of a story. They hadn't even seen the papers yet, but already the pressure was heavy. I reached into my bag slowly, carefully, and pulled out the folded deed. The old paper with my family's name. Proof that no HOA could erase. The officers took it, studied it, and exchanged glances. But just as one of them nodded, one of the HOA members shouted again. "This doesn't matter. He's dangerous. Arrest him now." I turned my head, looking straight at them. Their eyes were filled with fury, like this wasn't about rules or land. It was about control. It was about power. And in that moment, I realized something. This fight wasn't going to end with one police visit. This was only the beginning. I'm going to pause here, because I want to ask you. What would you have done in my place? Would you stand your ground calmly, like I did, or would you have shouted back, given them a taste of their own anger? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know how you'd handle an HOA calling the cops on you, on your own land. I looked at the officers holding my deed. Their eyes scanned every word on that faded paper. And for a moment, time felt frozen. 7 years away, and now all of it came crashing back. I remembered the last time I stood here. The day I locked the door and walked away. My father had just passed, the house felt empty, the land felt heavy with silence. And I couldn't stay. I left to build my life elsewhere, thinking I would return one day, maybe with peace in my heart, maybe with a family of my own to show them the place where I grew up. 7 years later, here I was, standing where my childhood memories lived. But instead of warmth and welcome, I was greeted with shouting, threats, and flashing police lights. As I stood in front of the officers, my eyes wandered to the old dock by the lake. I saw myself as a boy, fishing with my father, running barefoot in the grass. And then my eyes shifted back to the HOA board members glaring at me like I was some criminal. The contrast almost broke me inside. One of the officers cleared his throat. "Sir, this deed does seem to show your ownership. Can you confirm when you inherited this?" I nodded. My father passed away. The land came to me after that. I'd been away for 7 years, but this property never stopped being mine. The officer looked at the HOA. Their faces twisted with anger, like someone had stolen their power. One man shouted, his voice echoing across the quiet street. "He abandoned it. You can't just disappear for years and come back like nothing happened. We've kept this neighborhood together, we've maintained everything. This land should belong to us." I felt the weight of his words. Abandoned. That's what they called it. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know how hard it was to leave. How much pain it took to walk away. I wanted to tell them about the nights I cried thinking about this land. About the guilt of staying away. But I knew they didn't care. They didn't care about my father. They didn't care about my memories. They only cared about power and money. Another board member leaned forward, sneering. "You can wave your paper all you want, but you don't live here. You don't belong here anymore. HOA rules don't allow abandoned property. We took it over. We decided what was best." I stared at him, my fists tight at my sides. "Best for who?" I asked. "Best for you? Or best for this community?" He didn't answer. Because the truth was written all over his face. The officers stepped between us, holding their hands up. "Everyone calm down," one said. "This isn't how we're going to settle this." But inside, I could feel it. This wasn't going to be settled easily. Not with rules. Not with paperwork. Not with reason. Because when someone believes they own what isn't theirs, logic doesn't matter. I thought about my father again. The way he used to fight the HOA himself, always standing firm, never bending to their demands. He told me once, "Son, this land is more than soil and trees. It's our history. Don't let anyone take it from you." His voice echoed in my head as I looked at the people trying to strip it away from me. And for the first time in 7 years, I felt stronger. I straightened my back, looked directly at the officers, and said, "I'm not leaving. This is my land. And I'm not going anywhere." Gasps rippled through the crowd of neighbors watching. Some whispered nervously, others shook their heads. But I saw something else too. One old neighbor, standing on her porch, she gave me the smallest nod. Like she remembered my father. Like she knew the truth. That nod gave me hope. The HOA, though, wasn't done. One woman nearly screamed, pointing at the officers. "You need to arrest him. Right now. He's breaking HOA law. HOA law." As if that was stronger than the law of the land. The officers turned back to her, their voices calm but firm. "Ma'am, HOA rules are not above state property laws. If he has the deed, he has the right to be here." Her face turned red with fury. She stomped her foot like a child. "This isn't fair. We worked hard while he was gone. We deserve this land." Her words hit me like a storm, but not because of their truth. Because of their desperation. It was clear they had wanted this property for themselves all along. Maybe they dreamed of selling it. Maybe they wanted the lake access. Maybe they wanted to erase my family's name from this community. Whatever it was, they were willing to do anything to get it. Even lie to the police. Even try to humiliate me in front of everyone. I stayed quiet for a long moment, just listening to them scream, accuse, and twist reality. And I thought to myself, how did we get here? How did a neighborhood meant to bring people together turn into a battlefield of control? How did the very people who should protect homeowners become the ones trying to steal from them? The officers looked tired already. They gave me back my deed and said they'd file a report. They reminded the HOA that they couldn't claim private property as their own. But even as the officers stood there, I could see it in the HOA's eyes. They weren't finished. This wasn't the end. And I knew the real fight was only beginning. Now I want to ask you. If you came back after years away, and your neighbors tried to take your family land, would you walk away quietly, or would you stand your ground and fight until the end? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know how you would handle a battle like this. The officers had barely driven away, the sound of their engines fading down the street, when the HOA turned on me again. I could feel their eyes burning into me. They didn't say a word at first, but their silence was louder than shouting. Finally, one of them stepped closer, his voice low but sharp. You might have won today, but don't think this is over. I stayed quiet. Because sometimes silence is more powerful than words. But inside, my heart raced. Not because I was afraid of them, but because I knew they meant it. They weren't going to stop. I looked at the house again, the front porch leaning, the roof weathered, windows dusty from years of neglect. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And now, it had become a battleground. The HOA members began to walk away, muttering to each other. But as they left, one woman turned back and shouted across the lawn. "We'll fine you for every single violation we can find. You won't last a month here." Her words echoed in the quiet air. And just like that, they were gone. I stood alone on the grass, the sun sinking low, the lake glowing orange in the evening light. For a brief moment, peace returned. But my mind was far from peaceful. I thought back to my father again. He used to tell me stories about the HOA even when I was a kid. How they would knock on the door and complain about the paint on our fence. How they'd threaten him with fines for leaving tools in the yard. How they always found a way to turn neighbors against each other. And now, it was my turn. I walked slowly toward the dock. The boards creaked under my feet, but they held. I sat at the edge, staring into the water. The ripples reflected the sky, the trees, and a piece of my own face. I whispered to myself, "I'm home." But the moment was short-lived. Because behind me, I heard footsteps. Not the angry stomps of the HOA, but softer, careful ones. I turned around. It was my neighbor. An older woman, gray hair tied back, a gentle face lined with years of living here. She had been the one who nodded at me earlier, when the HOA tried to humiliate me. Now she walked closer, hands folded in front of her. "I remember you," she said softly. "You're James's boy, aren't you?" I nodded. "Yes. I'm David. My father was James." Her eyes softened, but there was sadness in them too. "Your father was a good man. He fought them too, you know. He never let the HOA push him around. I admired him for that." Hearing her speak my father's name, it felt like a hand on my shoulder. A reminder I wasn't alone. She sat down beside me on the dock. "I watched what happened today. The way they came at you, it's the same way they came at him. Only difference is, now they're bolder. They'd had years to grow stronger. They run this neighborhood like a kingdom." Her words cut deep. Because I could see it. The HOA wasn't just a board, it was a machine. One that thrived on fear, control, and silence. She looked at me again, her voice firmer this time. "But you have something they can't take away. This land. Your family's name. Don't let them scare you off." For the first time that day, I felt hope stronger than fear. We talked a little longer. She told me how the HOA had fined neighbors for ridiculous things: a garden hose left out, curtains the wrong shade, a mailbox not approved by their board. People paid because they were tired of fighting. And slowly, the HOA grew bolder. Richer. Untouchable. By the time she left, the sun had set. And I sat alone again, but not defeated. Because now I had a memory of my father, and the kindness of a neighbor, both standing behind me in spirit. The night was quiet, but I couldn't sleep easily. Every sound outside made me wonder if the HOA would strike again. Would they come back in the dark? Would they try to trespass on my property, the same way they accused me of trespassing on theirs? I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the wood groaning with every shift of the night breeze. And I made a decision. I wasn't going anywhere. The next morning, I got up early. The grass was wet with dew, the air crisp, birds singing in the trees. It should have been peaceful. But then I saw it. A bright yellow paper taped to my front door. I pulled it down and read it. HOA violation notice. For what? For unauthorized occupancy. For failure to submit proper approval before re-entering property. For unkept yard. I laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was bitter. Because this was their game. If they couldn't take the land by force, they would bury me in fines. As I stood there with the paper in my hand, I felt anger rising. But beneath it, determination. They wanted me gone. They wanted me to break. They wanted me to give up. But I wasn't going to. This was my land. My father's land. And I would fight for it until my last breath. I looked out across the yard. The neighbors watching again. Some with pity, some with fear. And some, maybe, with hope. Because maybe, just maybe, if I stood my ground, they might find the courage to stand too. And now I want to ask you. If your HOA started slapping you with fake violations the very next morning, would you pay the fines just to keep peace, or would you fight back, even if it meant a war with your whole neighborhood? Tell me below, because your answer says everything about how much you'd let them control your life. I held that yellow notice in my hand. The words blurred for a second as anger and disbelief flooded my mind. Unauthorized occupancy. How could I be unauthorized on my own land? I crumpled the paper in my fist and stood there on the porch, the cool morning air cutting across my face. It wasn't even 8 a.m., and already the HOA had made their move. I knew this was just the beginning. And I was right. By noon, I found 3 more notices taped to the door. 1 for improper lawn maintenance. 1 for failure to register with the HOA office before returning. And another for non-compliance with community standards. Each one came with a fine, $50, $100, even $200. The numbers were small, but I knew what they were doing. It was never about the money. It was about breaking me down, piece by piece, until I gave up. As I stood there reading those notices, I saw movement across the street. 2 HOA board members, standing with their arms crossed, watching me. One of them smirked, as if to say, "How long before you crack?" I didn't give them the satisfaction. I walked back inside, closed the door, and leaned against it. My father's words echoed again. Never let them scare you off. But even as I remembered his strength, I felt something pressing heavy on my chest. 7 years gone, and I had just returned. I wanted peace. I wanted to rebuild memories here. Instead, I had walked straight into war. The phone rang suddenly. I picked it up, expecting maybe a friend or an old neighbor. But it was them. The HOA. A man's voice came through, cold and rehearsed. "Mr. David, this is a formal warning. Your continued presence without HOA approval violates community bylaws. If you do not vacate within 7 days, we will pursue legal action." I closed my eyes and let him finish his script. When he was done, I spoke calmly. "I'm not leaving. This is my land. If you want to fight, you'll have to fight the truth." He didn't argue. He just hung up. The silence that followed was deafening. I walked out onto the porch again, looking at the lake. The sun was high, the water sparkling, birds flying across the horizon. It was beautiful. It was mine. And yet, it felt like a cage. The neighbors were out again. Some watering their lawns, some pretending to sweep porches, but I could feel it, their eyes on me. Some looked away when I glanced at them. Others kept watching, curiosity mixed with fear. And then, the whispers started. I could hear them faintly across the street. "He's back, after all these years. HOA won't let him win. He should have stayed away." Every word was like a stone thrown against me. But I didn't move. Because leaving would mean surrender. And surrender wasn't an option. That evening, I decided to walk the property. I traced the old fence line, the one my father built with his bare hands. The wood was rotting, falling apart, but it still stood tall enough to mark the boundaries. Boundaries they wanted to erase. As I walked, I thought about everything they had said. Trespasser. Abandoner. Rule breaker. And I realized something important. They weren't just trying to take the land. They were trying to rewrite the story. To make me the villain in my own home. I stopped near the edge of the yard where the grass met the lake. The sun was setting, casting the whole place in fire orange light. And for the first time, I spoke out loud to myself. They think they can erase me. But I'm not going anywhere. The next day, the attacks grew worse. I woke to the sound of hammering. I ran outside to see HOA workers pounding a new sign into the ground. Private HOA property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Right there. On my land. I stormed toward them. What do you think you're doing? I shouted. One of the men didn't even look at me. Orders from the board. Talk to them. I ripped the sign out of the ground and threw it onto the driveway. This is my land. Don't ever put that up again. They shrugged and walked away, but I could see the smirks on their faces. They wanted me angry. They wanted me rattled. But I wasn't giving them the satisfaction. Later that afternoon, I found yet another notice, this one threatening a lawsuit for removal of HOA property. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so exhausting. And that was their plan. Exhaust me. Drain me. Make me feel alone until I gave in. But I wasn't alone. That evening, as I sat on the porch, the old neighbor who had spoken to me before walked over again. She carried a plate of cookies in her hands, her voice low so others wouldn't hear. Don't let them break you, she whispered. They've done this to others too. Most people gave up. But your father never did. And I know you won't either. Her kindness hit me harder than all the HOA's threats. It reminded me that not everyone wanted me gone. Some people, even if they stayed quiet, were rooting for me. I thanked her, and as she walked back to her porch, I felt a strange mix of fear and strength. Because I knew the battle was only heating up. Now I want to ask you. If your HOA planted a big trespasser sign on your own land, would you rip it out like I did, or would you leave it there and fight in silence? Drop your answer in the comments, because I want to know what kind of fighter you are when the place you call home is under attack. I thought ripping that sign out of the ground would be the end of it. But I should have known better. The HOA wasn't done humiliating me. The very next morning, I woke up to flashing lights outside my window again. Police cars. Not one, not two, but 3 of them lined up at the edge of my driveway. I rushed outside, and there they were, the HOA board, standing tall and smug like they had summoned an army. They didn't even wait for me to speak. One of them pointed right at me and shouted to the officers. There he is. The trespasser. He ripped down official HOA property. Arrest him now. The officers stepped out slowly, scanning the yard. They didn't rush. They didn't draw weapons. But their presence was heavy, like a storm cloud hanging over me. I raised my hands, palms open, calm. Officers, you've been here before. You know the truth. This is my land. I have the deed. They're lying to you again. The HOA members shouted back in unison. Don't believe him. He forged that paper. He's dangerous. Their voices clashed in the air, drowning out everything else. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. Neighbors started coming out again. Some stood quietly on porches. Others moved closer, whispering to one another. And then, it happened. One man, a neighbor I barely remembered, stepped forward and shouted across the street. Leave him alone. That land has been in his family for years. You people are out of control. The HOA turned on him instantly. You don't know what you're talking about. He abandoned it. He doesn't deserve it. But his voice had lit a fire. Another neighbor spoke up. Then another. Soon, the whole street was buzzing with voices, some siding with me, others siding with the HOA. It was no longer just me versus them. It was a community divided. The officers tried to calm the chaos, but the HOA wouldn't stop. One woman screamed, pointing at me like I was a criminal. He's refusing to comply with HOA law. If you don't remove him, we'll sue this entire department. Her threat hung heavy in the air. The officers exchanged glances, clearly tired of being dragged into this fight. Finally, one of them held up a hand. Enough. We've seen the deed. We've checked the records. This man has every right to be here. If you continue to file false reports, you'll be the ones facing charges." The HOA froze. For the first time, their faces cracked. Not with fear, but with fury. Because they weren't winning. One of the men leaned close, his eyes locked on mine. "You think this is over? You're wrong. You may have the law on your side, but we run this neighborhood. And we'll make sure you regret ever coming back." His words slithered through me like poison. And as the officers left, I knew they meant every syllable. That night, the tension didn't fade. It grew. I heard footsteps outside my house long after dark. Whispers in the yard. The sound of something scratching against the fence. Every creak of the old wood made me sit up in bed, my heart pounding. Were they trying to scare me away? Or were they planning something worse? By morning, I had my answer. Spray paint. Across the side of the house. 4 words, dripping red in the sunlight. "You don't belong." I stood there staring at the letters, my fists clenched, my jaw tight. The audacity. The hatred. The desperation. I grabbed a bucket of water and started scrubbing, but the paint didn't come off easily. And the whole time, I could feel their eyes. The HOA. Watching from the corner, whispering, smiling at my struggle. But I didn't break. Because every stroke of that sponge reminded me of one thing: I wasn't fighting just for myself. I was fighting for my father. For the history in this land. For every homeowner who had ever been pushed around by people drunk on power. Later that day, the old neighbor came back again. She stood by me, helping me scrub. Her voice was low, but strong. "You can't let them see you fall. That's all they want. If you stand, others will stand with you." Her words gave me strength. But as the sun set again, I couldn't shake one thought. How far were they willing to go? The fines hadn't worked. The police hadn't worked. Now vandalism. What came next? I sat on the porch as the night fell, the air heavy with silence. The lake was calm, but inside me, a storm raged. I knew this wasn't just about land anymore. This was about pride. Control. Domination. And the HOA would not stop until they broke me. Or until I broke them. Now let me ask you. If your HOA called the cops on you twice, vandalized your home, and tried to turn your whole neighborhood against you, would you pack up and leave to keep your peace, or would you dig in your heels and fight them until the very end? Tell me in the comments, because this is the moment where character truly shows. I thought I had seen the worst of them. But I was wrong. The spray paint was only the beginning. A few days later, I found a thick envelope shoved into my mailbox. No return address, just my name written in bold letters. I opened it on the porch, the lake shimmering behind me, and inside were pages and pages of legal threats. The HOA was suing me. They claimed I was violating community bylaws, that I was endangering property values, that I had illegally reoccupied abandoned land. Every page was filled with twisted words designed to make me look like the villain. I sat there flipping through the papers, my stomach heavy, my hands trembling. It wasn't just fines anymore. It was war. Neighbors walked by as I read, some glanced with pity, others with satisfaction. And then I heard the familiar voice of one board member, loud enough for everyone around to hear. "Hope he enjoys bankruptcy. HOA doesn't lose." The smugness in his tone nearly made me snap. But I stayed quiet. Because rage was what they wanted. What I needed was resolve. That night, I spread the papers across my table. Every line felt like a dagger, but hidden beneath their threats, I saw something. Weakness. They weren't confident. They weren't righteous. They were desperate. Because if they were truly in control, they wouldn't have to scream so loudly. They wouldn't have to attack so hard. Still, the thought of facing them in court chilled me. I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't wealthy. I was just a man who came back to his family's land. But sometimes, that's enough. The next morning, I called the courthouse and confirmed what I already feared. The HOA had filed an official complaint. And in 3 weeks, I would have to stand before a judge. 3 weeks. That's all the time I had to prepare for the fight of my life. The days that followed were tense. Every time I stepped outside, I could feel their eyes. Every time I walked the property line, I saw them scribbling on clipboards, writing down violations. Overgrown weeds. Peeling paint. Unapproved repairs. They didn't stop. They wouldn't stop. And yet, something began to change. Neighbors. The same people who had stayed silent before, started talking to me. One man came over, his hat in his hand, eyes darting around nervously. "Listen, I don't want to get in the middle of this, but the way they're treating you, it isn't right. They've been bullying everyone for years. We're all just too scared to say anything." Another neighbor, a younger couple, stopped by late one evening. They whispered through the screen door. "They fined us $500 for having the wrong kind of blinds. We paid it because we didn't want trouble. But watching them attack you, it makes us wonder how much longer we can keep quiet." Their words hit me harder than the lawsuit. Because it proved something I had suspected all along. The HOA didn't just want my land. They wanted control over everyone. And maybe, just maybe, if I stood firm, I wouldn't be standing alone. But the board saw it too. And that made them furious. The night before the second police visit, I heard shouting outside again. HOA members gathered at the end of my driveway, holding papers in their hands, chanting words like trespasser and rule breaker. They weren't just fighting me anymore. They were staging a show for the whole neighborhood to see. I walked out slowly, calm as ever, and faced them. "This is my land," I said. "You can throw papers at me, call me names, drag me into court, but nothing changes the truth. You don't own this. You never did." Their leader stepped forward, eyes burning with rage. "We own the rules. And if you don't follow them, you'll be destroyed." His words cut like ice. But behind him, I saw something else. Faces in the crowd. Neighbors watching. And for the first time, some of them weren't nodding along with the HOA. Some of them were nodding at me. That small shift gave me strength. As the HOA stormed off, throwing their threats into the night, I stood taller than I had in days. Because I knew, even if the fight in court would be brutal, I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for everyone who was too afraid to stand. The following week dragged like a slow storm. More violation notices. More threats. Even a letter taped to my door that read, "Leave before it's too late." I tore it down, but I couldn't ignore the weight of it. Would they actually cross the line? Would they go beyond legal threats, into something darker? I didn't know. But I was ready. The day of the hearing drew closer, and with every sunrise, my determination grew stronger. Because this wasn't just about property anymore. It was about dignity. It was about truth. It was about refusing to bow down to people who thrived on fear. And deep down, I knew my father would be proud. Now I want to ask you. If your HOA dragged you into court with false claims, trying to bankrupt you just to steal your land, would you settle quietly and walk away, or would you risk it all to stand in front of a judge and defend what's yours? Tell me in the comments, because this is where the real test of courage begins. I woke up on the morning of the hearing with my chest heavy and my mind racing. The sun barely broke through the blinds, the lake outside was still, almost too still, as if it knew today would decide everything. I dressed in silence. Every button I closed felt like armor being strapped on. This wasn't just about me walking into a courthouse, it was about walking into the lion's den. When I arrived, the HOA was already there. 5 of them lined up like soldiers, their suits sharp, their faces sharper still. They smirked as I walked in, whispering to each other. One of them leaned close enough for me to hear. "Today's the day you lose everything." I didn't answer. I didn't even look at them. Because I wasn't here to trade insults. I was here for the truth. The courtroom felt cold. The air heavy. The sound of shuffling papers, footsteps echoing on the tile, the judge entering and taking her seat. All rise. And just like that, it began. The HOA's lawyer stood first. His words came fast, slick, rehearsed. Your Honor, this man abandoned his property for 7 years. He failed to comply with HOA bylaws. His return is unlawful. His presence is a danger to the stability of this community. We ask that his rights be terminated and the property be placed under HOA control. His voice carried like thunder. Neighbors sitting in the back of the courtroom whispered nervously. The board members nodded like kings waiting for their crown. Then, it was my turn. I rose slowly, holding the deed in my hand. The paper wasn't new. It wasn't flashy. But it was truth. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady but strong. This land belonged to my father. It was passed to me legally. I may have been gone for years, but absence does not erase ownership. I've maintained this deed, I've paid the taxes, and I've never signed it away. This land is mine, and no HOA can change that. The lawyer scoffed. Paid the taxes, he repeated, as if mocking me. Yes, I said firmly. Every single year. I pulled out receipts, stacked neatly, each one proof. The judge leaned forward, studying them carefully. The room grew quiet. For the first time, the HOA shifted uncomfortably. But they weren't finished. The board members took turns testifying. They painted me as reckless, irresponsible, a danger to property values. They twisted stories, exaggerated, lied through their teeth. I stood there listening, my jaw tight, my hands gripping the edge of the table. But when it was my turn to speak again, I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I just told the truth. I told the court about my father. About the memories on that land. About the way the HOA had tried to erase not just my rights, but my family's history. I told them about the vandalism. The fake violation notices. The false 911 calls. And as I spoke, I saw it happen. Faces in the crowd changed. The smirks of the board faded. Even the judge's eyes softened as she listened. Then came the moment that sealed it. A witness stepped forward. The old neighbor. The woman who had stood by me when no one else did. Her voice cracked, but it carried with strength. Your Honor, I've lived next to that land for decades. I knew his father. I watched what the HOA did to him, and now to his son. This man isn't a trespasser. He's a homeowner. A rightful owner. And the HOA has gone too far. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The HOA's lawyer tried to object, but it was too late. The truth had been spoken, clear and undeniable. The judge looked down at the papers, the testimonies, the evidence. And then, finally, she looked up. Enough, she said, her voice firm. I've heard more than enough. The silence in that room was so heavy, you could hear hearts beating. Her gavel struck once. This land belongs to Mr. David. The HOA has no authority to claim it. Any further harassment or false claims will result in legal penalties against the board. Case dismissed. The sound of the gavel still echoes in my ears. It was more than just wood hitting wood. It was justice. It was freedom. The HOA board froze in their seats, their faces pale, their power crumbling in front of everyone. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Victory. When I walked out of that courtroom, neighbors followed me. Some clapped me on the back. Some apologized for staying silent so long. And some simply looked at me with relief in their eyes, as if I had broken chains none of them could break alone. Back on my land, I stood on the porch, staring out at the lake. The water shimmered, calm, endless. The old dock stood steady. The house creaked, but it stood tall. And for the first time in 7 long years, it felt like home again. I thought of my father. Of the battles he fought. Of the words he once told me. And I whispered to the wind. I did it, Dad. I kept the land. But even as peace settled over me, I knew one thing for sure. The HOA wouldn't forget this. And though I had one today, tomorrow, the war might rise again. Now I want to ask you. If you stood in that courtroom, facing people who lied about you, twisted the truth, and tried to steal your family's land, would you have the courage to fight until the gavel struck, or would you have walked away long before the battle ever reached a judge? Tell me in the comments, because your answer shows just how far you'd go when everything you love is on the line.